one.
Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, are there any comments from the public that pertain to items not on the agenda? Seeing none. Are there any corrections to the agenda or consent calendar? No. You have a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
I'll move that we adopt the consent calendar.
Second.
Hang on just a second. I'm going to try, let me see if I can, I'm not having, let's see this. I started to vote. Did I vote? I said I can't see. Usually will show up with all their Tuesday votes. I'm going to try one more time. I'm going to do a roll call.
Right.
So we're going to do a roll call. We're going to do it verbally. So for the consent calendar, Exline, how would you like to vote?
Yay.
Sheehan, how would you like to vote?
Yes.
Henderson, how would you like to vote?
Yes.
Ramses, how would you like to vote?
Yes.
Haven, how would you like to vote?
Yes.
And that motion passes unanimously.
Okay. No consent items were brought forward. Moving on to 6A, Harvey Place Reservoir Aeration Line Replacement. Mark?
Good afternoon. I'm here today with requesting authorization to bid for the Harvey Place Reservoir Aeration Line Replacement Project. And Harvey Place Reservoir is our treated wastewater reservoir. It's in Alpine County on Diamond Valley Ranch. It's about 3,600 acre-feet in capacity. And we use the reservoir to store water that's pumped from our wastewater treatment plant up and over Luther Pass during the winter so that we can release that water downstream to our ranching partners during the summer so it can be used. And so this reservoir has some kind of key factors that make it at risk for water quality issues. The first obviously being that it's almost 100% treated wastewater. And so this water is high in nutrients and salt. And the nutrients that are in the treated wastewater, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, obviously can stimulate both blooms of algae and toxic cyanobacteria. And so that's a risk in and of itself. But also, the reservoir is located in a kind of a warmer area that in the summer you can have what's called thermal stratification of the reservoir. And so water, it gets less dense as it warms up. That's why if you've ever been in like a pool in the summer, it feels nice and warm at the top, and then you swim down to the bottom and it gets really cold. And so what happens when that happens in a reservoir is that the bottom water is actually totally blocked from oxygen in the atmosphere because that kind of warm, buoyant layer is floating on the top and it's not mixing down. And so what can happen under those low oxygen conditions in a reservoir is that you get anaerobic bacteria that break down minerals in the sediment and release even more nutrients into the reservoir. And so those accumulate at the bottom, and then when the reservoir mixes come around like late summer or fall, those nutrients mix into the upper waters where they can stimulate algae blooms. And we actually saw this really badly last summer in Harvey Place Reservoir, where our lab measured microcystins, which is an algal toxin, in a concentration that was 265 times the California danger level. And at that time, luckily, the reservoir was low enough level where we could retain some flow. We didn't have to release downstream. But if that happened at a time when we had higher pools, you know, we're getting water from the plant, we have to let water pass through, and that would have had to go downstream. And so that presents a risk, obviously, not just to our ranchers, but also to the local ecosystem down there. You know, if you have a stagnant water body that's being used by birds and wildlife that has algal toxins, there can be a risk there. And so to mitigate that, back in 1988, the district actually constructed its first what's called a line diffuser aeration system in the reservoir. And basically all it is it's an impermeable hose that is connected to an air compressor. That hose runs all the way down to the bottom of the reservoir, and then it has some really small, like millimeter scale openings in the bottom, and it releases compressed air in small bubbles. And so that kind of does two things. So first of all, it oxygenates that bottom water so that you're not having all the additional nutrient release from the sediment that can stimulate those algae blooms. And it's also kind of aggravating the surface of the water. And these cyanobacteria, the toxic, they're also known as harmful algal blooms. You've probably heard the term. They do not like disturbed water. They like it to be really stagnant, no flow. And so it's kind of performing this dual duty of both adding oxygen to the water, but also mixing and aggravating it so that you're lessening the cyanobacteria's ability to grow. And so that system worked well for a while. About a year or a little over a year ago, the compressor that supplies the compressed air to that system failed. We went and replaced the compressor, and then when we started back up, I went down there and inspected the system and found that the actual line diffuser itself was really badly damaged. And so instead of having bubbles released over a large area, there were areas in the line that were severed that were causing these big bubble plumes to be released up in specific areas. And so it wasn't, the current system doesn't fulfill the goal of its intended purpose, which is to oxygenate and to mix the reservoir. And so this authorization to bid that we're looking for is just to replace the line diffuser part. And we would like to replace it with a more modern system. So a lot has changed since they put in this original system. So first of all, this original system has lead-weighted lines, kind of similar to what we saw in Lake Tahoe, the lead-weighted service lines, right, or electrical lines. So instead of using like anchors to anchor these down to the bottom, basically it just had like an extra sleeve in the bottom, sunk it down with lead, right? So we have that. Once they're down, they're down. You can't go do maintenance on them, right? And so these new systems, what they have is they have a buoyancy line and they have a diffuser line. And so at any time, you can float the system up and do maintenance on it. We're expecting that that'll lead to a much longer longevity of the system and more effectiveness because we'll be able to keep on a maintenance schedule. And so the general project would be a design-build strategy. There are only a few different design builders in the country that do this kind of work. But what we would need is we would need to initially do a survey of the bathymetry of the reservoir, and that would be done with like an echo sounder that uses sonar to, so you'd actually drive a boat all over across the bottom of the reservoir, and it would allow you to get a bunch of points that you can then interpolate into like a contour map at the bottom of the reservoir. And that'll help us target where the exact best place to place this is. We don't have any as-built for the original system, and the bathymetry for the original system was just based on what the land surface looked like at the time before they flooded it. And so we're not even 100% sure We could have had sediment deposition or any number of things that could have changed the morphometry down there. And so we want to know what that is so that we can design the best system to meet our needs for the oxygenation. We would have the contractor remove and dispose of the old lead-weighted system, and then we would design and construct a new system. We would be requiring a 90% design submittal, 100% design submittal prior to construction. And we would like to have this done this summer. We have been working with our operations to determine schedule and constraints and the best timeline for this. It is fairly time sensitive because of how we have to operate the reservoir. We need to get that reservoir down to dead pool by October 15th because after then we can't release any water by law. And so if you look at how much water we can release from the reservoir, it actually takes quite a few months to get it down to that level. And so we would need to basically finish construction by July in order to be able to resume our normal releases and get the reservoir dropped down to that level we need to make capacity. And so that's the general process. The engineer's estimate for this project is $328,000. And I'm happy to answer any questions before reading the requested action.
I just have a quick comment. I don't have a problem with the system at all. I mean, it sounds like it's desperately needed, and the value of what it's going to do, just in terms of the quality of water that we release to the ranchers, it seems like it's pretty important. I'm hoping that we can communicate this, because I know we're going to start ramping up our conversations with the ranchers in terms of what we invest in the water that we provide them, the recycled water that we provide them. So, and I know we do other improvements to Harvey Place, just kind of tallying that stuff up, and that's probably more for Adrian, just trying to have that kind of number available. So, I mean, I support it. I think it's important that we keep the quality of that water that we release to the ranchers, to have, value to them. They are getting it, I think, for free right now. So, it's an extreme value for them. Just want that to acknowledge that. But I appreciate the depth at which this project is going into in terms of bathymetric surveys. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
So I agree. I think this is a good thing to do, and clearly it seems like it's not quite yet landed on the CIP. And I guess more of a question on just tracking the status of the reservoir. So the bathymetry, it sounds like this will be the first, almost establishing somewhat of a baseline, since we don't really know what the bathymetry was prior to filling everything up.
Yeah, it would be to the extent that we can trust the original the topography that we used. So depending on how accurate that original topography that we used is, we could potentially use this to see how it's filled with sediment. I will say that the method that we would be using for the bathymetry is not the best for tracking sediment. Typically for sedimentation, you'll use what's called a multi-beam data, where you're actually shooting out multiple sound waves at the same time and tracking how they all come back. You can usually get a centimeter scale resolution with that, so that can be really useful for tracking sediment. But we're very limited in the type of vessel we can get into this very small reservoir that has these really wide fluctuations in water level. And so kind of our approach is we were going to use a single beam on a 20-foot John boat, because that's about all we can get in there. However, I think that if we see over time, if we are seeing large changes in sediment deposition, so on the order of feet potentially, then this would be a good method to track that. And if anything, we could look at the design volume and then calculate our current volume and kind of use that as an estimate to see if we've actually been getting sediment deposition in there. I'd assume probably not all that much, because we don't get all that much surface water flow. It's mostly pipe flow from the plant, but we do get some surface water, so it's possible.
Yeah, I guess I was just more curious in terms of looking out and scheduling this at an interval to where you can actually start to track that. And I would assume there'd be some sediment maintenance or something that would need to happen down the road. So hopefully this will get us closer to understanding kind of what's going on with that. So.
Definitely, yeah.
Got a couple questions. One, just kind of procedurally, in the example you cited in terms of what was it last year when the levels spiked. In the event that we had to release the water, would there be like some notification to the ranchers? Like how does that work?
Yeah, there would have to be, and from what I remember, that we were considering it too, right?
We actually did stop discharging when levels got to the, I think, warning level. We had issues on the surface, but we measured the water coming out of the ditch, and actually the water in the ditch at the bottom was okay. But we started measuring the levels once a week, and once they got to a warning level, we notified all the ranchers and we stopped discharging. And once the levels went back down, we started discharging.
And then, yeah, something else that we are looking at that we're including in our operation and maintenance budget or proposed budget for this year is a cyanobacteria response plan for our reservoirs. So the Lahontan Basin Plan requires, unless it's a true emergency, so to do routine application of herbicides or chemical treatment for cyanobacteria blooms, you need to have one of these cyanobacteria response plans in place. And we don't have one right now, and so that would be another kind of line of defense. I have quite a bit of experience with reservoir management from my previous work with Valley Water, and I can say that there's no silver bullet. The aeration system is definitely going to help and reduce the risk, but that's not to say that we'll never have a cyanobacteria bloom. And so it's nice to have kind of a couple tools under Swiss Army knife to be able to respond appropriately. And obviously, low-impact non-chemical method is always our first choice. But in the event that we had to release water, that might be the time to use something like an herbicide or an algicide.
And just curious, with the replacement, what are the energy savings opportunities?
In terms of like using the algicides versus the oxygenation, or for the actual system itself?
The actual system.
There's no energy savings. It's the same compressor capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my final question was as it relates to kind of budgeted pending funding of 2026 CIP.
Mm-hmm.
This has been predicated assuming that we're going to continue rate increases that we have in perpetuity, just to make sure I kind of understand the nexus. Because in some ways we're moving forward on items that we haven't kind of authorized or paid for yet, or making assumptions in terms of continual relationship of rate increases. I just want to make sure I'm kind of understanding that correctly.
I would say yes, and that's generally how we have historically operated here at the district, only because so many of our projects carry over multiple seasons, and so we just kind of have to go with that assumption.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense, no disagreement, but just in like, so let's just say like, with the board's decision that we're going to go with 3% rate increases instead of 10. What then happens to this item? I mean, like, do you see where I'm going in terms of we're investing resource? Just so I make sure I have an understanding of from today than when we have the CIP meeting, in the future, that I understand the nexus between these two things.
Yeah, just as Nick just said, it becomes a prioritization issue, and I mean that's happened many, many times. I mean we've had years where we thought we'd have a 6% to 0, and we just had to look at that reality and reprioritize the projects moving forward.
Okay. Yeah, no more questions. I appreciate it.
Outside of, some of the requirements for getting it down to dead pool, do we have any kind of reservoir management plan laid out in any way? Or?
From 1988. The original. I would say it could use a revisit probably. But the typical operation since then has not really changed all that much. It's, get your reservoir down to dead pool by October 15th, retain all water from October 15th to April 1st, and then you can start your releases as early as April 1st. We typically don't start them that early.
But it doesn't really address some of these other issues that pop up.
It says that additional algae control may be required and should be consulted for.
I mean, we are on the hook to deal with Indian Valley Reservoir, Indian Creek Reservoir as well, right?
Where we are, yeah. Yeah, there's a total maximum daily load program for that reservoir. That was the reservoir that we have like it's the space cone oxygenation system in, looks like a spaceship. And then we also do regular sampling, and we do annual reporting to Lahontan on that. We're actually going to be having a conversation pretty soon with Lahontan to investigate a different treatment strategy for that reservoir that might be more effective. The oxygenation there hasn't been working that well, and also we had a failure of the compressor there that will require us to upgrade the site service, electrical service, and it would be a very expensive thing considering that the system isn't helping us meet the TMDL goals. And so I actually just recently reached out to Lahontan. We're going to have a discussion about an alternative compliance strategy where instead of doing our normal oxygenation and monitoring of that, we're going to be doing hopefully some lab incubations to look at different sediment treatments we could use, more of like a kind of set it and forget it thing. It would require, there would be less of a drain on staff, it'd be energy efficient, and also it would probably be more effective than the oxygenation.
One more thing, just real quick regarding ICR, since you brought it up. We all planning to have a conversation at some point in the future with BLM as well as some legal analysis work done to determine if it still makes sense for the district to be the manager of that reservoir or not, or to hand it back to BLM because they manage the campground around it.
And that's another reason why we haven't been so quick to move on ICR, because it happened so when the compressor there failed, corresponded with last October basically, which is when technically our license agreement to operate the reservoir with BLM expired. And so we don't want to commit to some really expensive fix before we know what our long-term obligations are. And that's another reason why I think this study is preferential, because it's something that is allowing us to be building information that could be used both by us but by potentially other agencies dealing with the same issue across the state, help us maintain compliance with the TMDL, and also cost us a lot less than we're currently spending on monitoring. So,
And then we never really addressed this in the recycled water strategy piece.
No, I think that the expectation was that we already had an effective oxygenation system operating. So I think this, from the purposes of the recycled water strategic plan, is just like is an existing condition of our system. But 1988 had a pretty good run. I've had these things fail after like 6 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Things from the 80s just came out better.
Yeah.
So I guess that you're going to scale this bubbler system in a way that, I guess that's part of the whole design build part of it all, is make sure we have a distribution of these bubblers, right?
Yeah. And yeah, so the goal, how we're planning on designing it, is actually to force mix the reservoir. So in a lot of these other larger reservoirs that don't seasonally fluctuate so much, you're just trying to add oxygen to the bottom while maintaining that stratification so that when it flips, that you don't have all those nutrients coming up. For this one, in talking to some of the design build firms, we kind of agreed that force mixing the reservoir is going to be more effective, which means you're basically just you're distributing the bubble plumes such that it's causing a constant circulation of the water. So you're not actually setting up, you're not getting that stratification. That's not a good strategy for like a salmonid headwaters because you need the cold water coming out the bottom. But for our purposes, it's totally fine, ranch water. It's a lot easier to manage and maintain. So.
You're really bringing up a lot of really hidden items.
I know, right? I got to get them all.
Your job really hard.
Got to get them all in while I'm up here.
Well, I appreciate it. No, that's good. I think we got to be on top of this stuff. And again, I think just to Nick's comment on just starting to tally all the costs associated with us delivering this water, and as we move into conversations with the ranchers, and again, we're not looking to make money, but maybe some cost recovery, some form of cost recovery. I think that's really just trying to understand kind of what the ultimate, what does it take to actually maintain the system. And obviously there's a lot of parts and pieces to it, but. All right, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, is there a requested action you would like us to consider?
Authorize staff to advertise for construction bids for the Harvey Place Reservoir Aeration Line Replacement Project.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Director Eckstein?
Yes.
Director Sheehan?
Yes.
Director Henderson? Yes. President Romba? Yes. Director Haven?
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to 6D, Washington Pressure Reducing Valve Station 1.
Hi, I'm Laura Hendrickson. I'm the new associate engineer at the district, and I'm here to request the board to authorize staff to advertise for construction bids for the Washington PRV station. Right now in the country club zone, we have a few areas with deficient fire flow, and some really far-reaching areas of that zone just aren't getting the pressures that we'd like. So we'd like to connect it to the Pine Valley zone using this pressure reducing station. It'll add redundancy and also just help with fire flow in that entire neighborhood out near Washone off Pioneer Trail. We'll also have an above-ground electrical cabinet, and we'll be able to view the pressures and the flows using SCADA here on site, so we'll get a little more insight into what's happening out in the field and be able to see any problems while they arise. We currently have plans and specs at about a 90% design. Working to finalize those this week, and we hope to have it out for advertising next Friday, February 14th, with plans to construct this summer before April 15th, or before October 15th at the end of dig season. And the CIP budget currently has $368,000 for this project. Our most recent engineer's estimate puts the work at about $275,000, and we have a Bureau of Reclamation grant for $100,000 for this project as well. Any questions?
Yeah, just really very supportive of kind of addressing fire pressure issues. So after this, will that address all the issues in that area, or are there still going to be kind of remnant pressure issues with fire flow in that area?
It'll really help with the country club zone off of Acoma Circle. We do have plans, along with the Pioneer Trail water line, to put in another PRV station on Jicarilla, which will help in the Susquehanna zone, and then another one at Marshall Trail. So this one will address in the specific area that we're looking at right now, but not in the whole system.
And those other two come on the Pioneer Trail?
Yes.
Well, and then just, I think Shelley will be later, but with all the new grant funding, we're still good with the grant funding?
Yep, this one's already secured. We already have all of the documentation for it. Yeah.
No, but I hear all kinds of rumors, and I don't trust what I hear on the internet. So.
The deadline's at the end of 2026, so that's why we're moving forward with this one for construction this summer.
Great project. Great to see you.
One additional note, just this project has been on our radar since at least 2015. So it kind of gives you a sense of how long it takes from concept to delivery on some of these key issues. So anyway, very excited. It's really predates Laura, but we're very excited to have her.
Under budget, first project?
We'll see. We'll see. This is going out to bid. This is going out to bid. We'll see.
No, that's starting with the home run, yeah.
It sounds like it's more like a pressure regulating across the zone. Is that kind of what I'm understanding there?
Yes, it will be reducing pressure from the main line to go into the country club zone to match the pressure in that zone.
And have customers, I guess, been notified of the fact that they may lose pressure, because I am part of the Pine Valley, and I did lose a significant amount of pressure at my home.
So it won't be affecting the Pine Valley zone
Right.
at all. It's just be adding redundancy going. So the country club zone currently only gets water flow from the airport booster, and so with this, it'll actually add additional water flow.
Okay.
So it shouldn't reduce any customer's pressure.
Okay. Hopefully not.
Keeping pipes from blowing up.
Cause mine to rattle more, so.
Okay, are there any public comments on this? Seeing none, what would you like us to consider?
Authorize staff to advertise for construction bids for the Washington PRV station.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Director Exline?
Yes.
Director Sheehan? Yes. Director Henderson?
Yes.
President Ronzo?
Yes.
Director Haven?
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, moving on to item 7A, I think, Melanie, you're going to help me out with this? Yep.
So, for the 2025 board committees, President Ramsos has spoken with each of the board members, and we have the following committee assignments. The first is for standing committees, which, as we were just reminded at ethics training, this has to meet Brown Act requirements, so we will be noticing an agenda 72 hours in advance, because this is these are the standing committees. The first one is executive committee. We have Ramsos and Haven. For finance committee, we have Sheehan and Exline. For water and wastewater operations committee, Ramsos and Henderson. System efficiency and sustainability committee, Ramsos and Exline. Then for ad hoc committees, which these are temporary in nature, so they do not require agenda noticing prior to meetings. We have Lakeside Park Associates, Henderson and Sheehan. Workforce Housing, Exline and Henderson. And Tahoe Keys Negotiations, Ramsos and Exline. Then we have liaisons, which these are just, they provide representation upon request by the board president to various different areas throughout the basin and into Alpine County. So we have Alpine County, Henderson. AQUA, which is the Association of California Water Agencies, Ramsos. CASA, California Association of Sanitation Agencies, Henderson. El Dorado County Oversight Board, Sheehan and Hughes as the alternative. We have the city and county fire departments, Haven and Henderson as the alternative. El Dorado County, Haven. City Council, Exline. U.S. Forest Service, Ramsos. And then finally, board-appointed representatives, which they attend agency board meetings as a voting member. And we have El Dorado Water Agency, Haven, with Sheehan as the alternate. And AQUA JPIA Board Representative, Ramsos, with Liz Kaufman as the alternate.
Thank you so much. And I did have a conversation with Melanie prior to the board just on the possibility of having alternates for our standing committees. And so we're going to look into that, ask our legal counsel to kind of consider the possibility of maybe having an alternate for our water and wastewater operations committee for me, for Joel, in case we aren't able to make the meeting, just to make sure we have some coverage. So, is there any action that we need to?
No action. Those are just the committees as of now that are appointed. So that'll be through the 2025 calendar year.
Is there any other comments, questions? We're good? Okay. Moving on. Board member reports.
Are there any actual committee reports today? Anybody wants to report on?
I did go to the
Sorry.
successor agency on January 21st. We had a meeting it was to, I've got notes here. It was previously the redevelopment agency, and so when that disbanded, then, so it was to approve the recognized obligation payment schedule. And then we did change legal counsel, same law firm. It's just that the attorney that previously represented us retired, so someone else took over, but not a lot of information. And then I can't remember the exact, because someone said, how long do we have to keep doing this? But it's decades.
Yes, I think one of the outstanding bond issues is that we will continue to contribute to our property tax goes into the 2040s.
Yes. So this is it doesn't really do much, but we did have that meeting.
So what does that mean? We're obligated to kick in some portion of our.
Yeah, because when the redevelopment agency existed, basin, or on the South Shore, I should say, including us as well as others. And because that was taken out prior to the devolution, we're still on the pay portion of that until it's complete. And most of that then is associated with all the redevelopment down the state line, the parking garage and other stuff that was built.
That's for agency, I'm assuming that there.
Yeah, exactly.
What does that mean for us in the bottom line?
It changes a little every year. I think this upcoming year, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I saw Greg put in about $600,000. And we don't like write a check. We never see that money and cut off the top side of the county, Colorado County, before it ever gets to us.
You want to mention? I mean, it was more of a driver, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so you can fill in, Shane, Mike. So we had an update for the Tahoe Keys negotiation process yesterday afternoon. You know, really was great. We were waiting for some time. We were looking kind of at the optionality of what it would take to integrate the key system into ours, their efficiencies, their cost to kind of bring things up, make the system run. We developed a series of options. The team that did it developed a series of options, you know, based on kind of cost and, you know, what could be achieved and, you know, benefits and so forth. And so we took that all in yesterday, kind of looked at the various different options. We can get into some of the details if you'd like, although I think other members of staff will give you better details than me. And then really where we go next is we're going to have the negotiation coordination discussion with the Keys board, which is great because Dave Peterson is our former board member is on their board now, and so really get to screw them. Just kidding. But you know, interested in the conversation. I thought it was great research, and I guess I would just add in the event that if the negotiations with the Keys and that kind of relationship doesn't flower, I still think it was a really good exercise that we got funding to complete to show, you know, deficiencies in our system, what we're going to, you know, tanks, everything we could do. So really informative, and we'll see where it goes with the conversation. Shane, if you want to add anything.
No, again, just there's 4 alternatives that were developed. All of them, obviously, they ranged in price from $23 million to 70-something million. Anyway, so there's range. I think there's potentially still some hidden costs that aren't really realized that we need to maybe bring forward as we sit down with the Keys and talk through that. But overall, I think it was a good conversation, and I think good information to know and understand where we can potentially support the Tahoe Keys one way or the other. So whether we bring them in or not. So I guess beyond that, I don't know, Paul, have anything to add on that, or?
I don't have anything to add. No, I think we're good.
Okay. No more ad hoc committee liaison reports? Good. Okay, moving on to item 8, board member reports.
I don't have a report, but just something out of kind of curiosity. So I think this is the first board meeting since, you know, fires in Southern California. And so it'd be great, and I don't know, can't speak for any other members of the board, but, you know, from when I started on the board till today, we've made, you know, incredible progress on the deficiencies, pressure, and other things. It'd be great to have kind of a check to see where we are now, because, you know, how it is piecing all these different things together, and then where we're going, and then how that aligns with the CIP budget. Not to ask like some incredible exercise, you know, a lot of hours, but that would be really helpful for me personally, and I think something that I'd be really interested with the members of the community as well. I think it's going to be a high priority for them. And then also, as we talk about, you know, CIP and budgeting and rates and so forth, I also think it does a lot to kind of justify what we're doing and why we're doing and so forth. So, you know, just a request if we could get an update on that and see where the deficiencies are, and, you know, I guess where we've come from, where the deficiency still exists, and then how we're going to close that gap would be great.
Yeah, and just to kind of jump on that, did we have a lot of input? Did you get any calls, Ryan, about, you know, there was no? Oh, okay.
We did, and I'm going to give an update on that.
Okay.
Okay. We talked to a lot of our, it's a great question, Kelly. We didn't hear from our customers.
Mm-hmm.
We talked to a lot of our agency partners.
Because there was I mean, it was, I know we all watched it and just went.
And it was really the spot where they said, you know, we turn on the tap and there's no pressure.
And there was nothing. Yeah.
I think in these extreme events that we need to be real careful about how we mess it. I mean, we just got to be careful about making sure people, I'm pretty appreciate the limits of our systems. Like, we can only do so much, but during these extreme weather events, and fires that come through, like, there's nothing that's going to stop it. So I think, yeah, I think it's important. We're doing everything we can to manage it, as best we can. So, yeah.
I think it's good to highlight what we've done. I mean, there's only so much
It is, but I don't want to give any kind of false impression that we're going to. We saved the basin because they did these things when an extreme wildfire event comes through, because it's,
Right, but we can do what we can do to make sure there's pressure. And I think that's their sole responsibility on this board, is to make sure. Right, so that should be our goal.
Okay, moving on to item 9, staff and attorney reports, private borrowings update.
Good afternoon, directors. As presented at the November 21st board meeting, STPUD identified the need for obtaining tax-exempt financing, specifically certificates of participation for several wastewater and water projects which did not qualify for state revolving fund loans. Staff worked with CSEA, Oppenheimer, Bartle Wells, and Jones Hall in preparation of these borrowings. Thereafter, the Board of Directors approved Resolutions 3288-24 and 3289-24 at the December 5th board meeting, authorizing the execution, delivery, and sale of both wastewater and water revenue certificates of participation. I'm happy to announce that the district closed these transactions successfully on January 30th, 2025. Final numbers resulted in COPs of $14,250,000 for water and $18,955,000 for wastewater, with interest of approximately 4.5%. These funds have been deposited with our trustee, Bank of America, in a money market account to begin earning interest. Staff will work on compiling a reimbursement request for items paid during this current fiscal year and will collaborate with the grants department to develop a process for reimbursements over the next 3 years. Are there any questions?
9A, Tahoe water for fire suppression update. There we go.
Good afternoon, board. Shelley Thompson. So, yeah, great questions. And so, just with water being such a focal point during the LA fires, I wanted to just provide an update on some of the things that we've been working on. You're aware of the construction projects, and Julie will come back with that. But we spoke with the city manager and city fire chief on how the district maintains our fire hydrants. We currently have a project out to bid to update our water model, which will refine our understanding of water pressure throughout our system. So in the past, the fire districts tested our hydrants for flow, and they've expressed interest in helping us update this water model and be a part of the process. So we're looking forward to working with them on that issue. The two chambers in town, Tahoe Chamber and South Lake Tahoe Chamber, are planning a public forum to address fire preparedness this April, and they have invited us to be on the panel. They're still figuring out what all that will look like, so I'll keep you posted as I learn more. Tahoe Regional Planning Agency puts out a monthly e-newsletter on profiles on progress. So this month, it will feature water infrastructure projects for fire suppression, including our Bijou Bowers and Black Bart waterline projects. So that email is expected to go out this week, and it highlights one of our projects, North Tahoe, Tahoe City, and Incline Villages project, to just show that region-wide, since Angora Fire, we've been working to upsize water infrastructure to address fire. Last week, the California Tahoe Conservancy's executive director met with the directors from both California and Nevada of the natural resource organizations. And prior to going down, CTC's been a really great partner for us when we talk about the important role water plays in fire. And so I shared information with them about some of our past regional projects, future needs, and this continued issue of lack of state funding for water districts. to work on water for fire specific infrastructure projects. Another thing that's going on is the Moore Foundation, which was established by Intel's co-founder, and some of their goals are supporting scientific discovery and environmental conservation. Big money, they give out a lot of money. They're having a conference in Tahoe this spring, and one of our former CAL FIRE chiefs is helping them put that on and has invited me to speak on their Wildfire Resilience Initiative panel. So we'll see what comes of that. At the state level, you know, they say third time is a charm, and so this year, Assemblymember Bennett from the Ventura area has reintroduced our water bill that expands Cal OES's grant program to include water for fire suppression. So the bill's been introduced. It's got a number. It's AB 372. So I'll keep you posted as that bill moves through the Assembly and the Senate. We have a lot of support from our California Tahoe Alliance partners, and we'll be soliciting support from AQUA and CSDA, Association of California Water Agency, and California Special District Association to try to get more support for that bill as it moves forward. As a reminder, we were successful at securing funding through Prep 4, the climate bond, so there is money for this. This bill just helps establish a mechanism within Cal OES to help distribute it out. So very excited to try to get that bill through this year. Yeah.
What's been the opposition at the state level for moving this forward?
Yeah, so the first time we did it, it identified a funding pot that had no money in it. And so it passed through the Assembly and the Senate, no problem. And when it got to the governor's office, he was like, there's no money in this pot. Find a pot with money and come back to us. And then last year when we introduced it, it was looking really good. Our Senator Alvarado Gil was a huge proponent and supporter of it. And like the day before it was supposed to pass, she switched political parties and almost all of her bills died on the floor that day. So I think it was a little bit of part of politics, not necessarily the meat and potatoes of this bill, because when we've shopped it around the Capitol, there has never been opposition to this topic. So, you know, we've been talking about water for fire in Tahoe for a very long time, but really statewide, this has kind of only become an issue other folks are aware of in the last year. Ventura fires, they ran out of water during the firefight. LA fires, they did. And like Shane said, municipal water systems aren't designed to fight wildfires, but we know that our system currently isn't up to fire code. So how we've made big investments to upsize our water lines, install hydrants, upsize our tanks, backup power. And we think that this is a benefit to the state and state-owned lands, and that there should be state funding to help water districts in the wildland-urban interface achieve this. Did I answer that question, or did I get on my soapbox?
Yeah, I guess sorry to make this comment, but I don't know, I had a professor in 2003 at the University of Nevada that explained exactly what's going to happen in the state of California with our insurance and fire flows. So the fact that state representatives are figuring this out in 2024, I find concerning. And, you know, yeah, I'll leave it there.
And then moving to the federal level, at the end of March, I'm heading back to D.C. with Tahoe City and North Tahoe Public Utility District. We continue to work with our federal representatives as well as our federal agencies on funding this critical infrastructure. So we're still awaiting the federal government to pass a budget, which will determine if we get that earmark or community-directed spending for our Park Avenue Waterline project. So I'll keep you posted as that progresses. So all of this is to say that our messaging is working, that when the LA fires hit, I got lots of calls from our partners, our agency partners around the basin that want to help move water for fire infrastructure forward at the state level. So, any questions?
Just a comment. I've spoken with some of the firefighters that were here for Caldor and fighting, and I know there's always room for improvement, but I will say that a lot of the CAL FIRE resources that came on board said that we had an immaculate ability to fight that fire. So we are doing good work, at least. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joel. After Caldor, we did a lot of tours for regional partners, our representatives, to show that when you do fuels management, home hardening, and have a robust water system, that those are three critical tools, and firefighters, feet on the ground, right, boots on the ground. Those are the critical, legs of the stool to protect our community from wildfire. So, yeah.
You nailed it. I was going to mention the need for fuels reduction, at least really considering our facilities and making sure they're hardened and they're somewhat fire resilient, so that we can continue to pump and maintain and have those features in place to back up power or water or whatever it is, increase our tank sizes or all those things, and just protecting those facilities just to make sure that it's a big package, just like you mentioned.
Right.
So it's really important that
a lot of
consider all these things. It's not just water flow, it's all these other things. So.
Yeah, I have a similar question. Is there, because it seems timely to have almost like a road show going around the base and showing that partnership, because the partnership exists. And it's about making more folks aware of what's going on to generate not only more support, but hopefully respond to folks that maybe think the basin's not doing anything about wildfire. So quick question, the update of the water model and kind of the partnering with at least the South Shore Fire District and the city fire, are we doing any, it seems like I'm trying to figure out a way to get that partnership acknowledged by like Lake Valley Board or somebody, like, can we go do a presentation to Lake Valley Fire District Board and say, hey, here's what we're doing in partnership with your department. Just, again, just raise awareness, right, of what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. We have a great relationship with Lake Valley and reaching out to them as well. Absolutely. Oh, right. We talked about it at the Ops Committee, but, we're updating our local hazard mitigation plan right now, and we're going to add it on to the county's plan once it's updated. But we work so closely with Lake Valley that we're including them in the plan update, so we're on the same cycle, time frame, whatnot, which is another great partnership opportunity. Okay.
And with that, more funding, hopefully, right?
All right, I'm up here for two more staff reports, so with no further questions, I'll move on. So the district was founded on September 28, 1950, which means that this fall is our 75th anniversary. Paul and I have brainstormed some celebration ideas that we would like your feedback on. So what do you think about a community open house here at the wastewater treatment plant? We're thinking midweek, sometime in September. We would invite the public, our agency partners, as well as our representatives to come on out, take a tour, learn more about our operations, and enjoy some food. Paul's really hoping that we can barbecue hot dogs. We would create, we'd give out some sort of commemorative community handout, showcase really historical highlights, as well as feature current projects and the equipment that we use to provide delicious Tahoe tap and keep our wastewater clean. So thoughts, suggestions on how you as a board would like to celebrate this landmark?
I actually prefer hamburgers. Sorry.
Plant-based or meat?
I got to go meat-based. Sorry, guys.
I think it's a great idea. I think, maybe getting another one of those opinion pieces out there, maybe clicking off all the accomplishments and some of the EPA awards we've received over the years, and maybe some retrospective kind of gain our ratepayers' appreciation for what we do, just talking through all the things that we're doing and, silently serving South Lake Tahoe. I think we do a lot more than that. So I guess if there's any opportunity to maybe further celebrate what we do.
Outreach around it.
I think we have a great story to tell. Our history is deep, and I think, like Shane said, putting together a compendium like just historical stuff and where we've been, it's pretty cool in terms of what this district's done.
Maybe pepper in where we're going.
Yeah.
Focus, the Tahoe water for fire suppression stuff. Some of those other things we're doing to help improve the resiliency of the system, and ensure that we're continuing to provide clean water and treat sewage.
Is there any tagline or logo?
For 1 year, basically edit our logo to add something about 75 years of service.
A transition logo.
Backgrounds for staff. I mean.
And then Adrian wants ball caps, I think he said.
I remember when Barton did their 50 and their 60, they just kind of highlighted the past, like through photos and things like that of like, hey, we built this here, we built this here, that was kind of cool to see like the progression of Barton. I think we could kind of tag along something like that too.
Yeah, tier pages and stuff a couple years ago.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good.
Good story.
Okay. So you're down to do a community open house and outreach and spend some time on this effort.
Project down, like everything torn up, or are we going to be pretty parking lot shut off?
Give a tour of the
Think of like what big stuff.
We'll work on that. We'll avoid that area.
Curtain.
Yeah, we'll see what areas the blowers are doing.
Aaron's going to be busy. Maybe tours of the plant. Maybe.
That's good. He's not even here.
Yeah, here so we can make that happen, I guess.
All right, ready to move on to the next staff report? So this is my last one. This is about federal grant funding. So Danielle and I are tag teaming today. She's at the Tahoe Interagency Executive Committee presenting on the Tahoe Water for Fire Suppression Partnership. And I am here with you, so have some updates on grants. But if you ask too many hard questions, we'll have to ask Danielle and come back. So last week, the Office of Management and Budget issued a memo that paused all federal assistance programs. The next day, the memo was rescinded. However, the President's executive orders may impact some of the administration of our grants. So I just wanted to provide an update on projects and funding that may be impacted. So for FEMA, we are currently awaiting FEMA to approve a scope change on our backup power projects out at Al Tahoe and Bayview Well. This project is planned for construction, and we have a $1.3 million grant, so are tracking that. We also have under FEMA, we're waiting for approval obligation of 2 FEMA mitigation projects. This is for the Fawn Leaf Lake Stanford Camp generator building that was taken out by the avalanches during the big winter, as well as out at Diamond Valley Ranch. We have access road repairs that were damaged from the mudslides after Tamarack Fire. So these projects are more or less complete, and we're just awaiting on final reimbursement to the tune of $1.2 million. So moving on to the Bureau of Reclamation, we were recently awarded 2 grants from the Bureau, one for water conservation and one for installing the rest of the meters out on the Loop Road. And these projects are supposed to begin now, but we've received an email from the Bureau stating that there's a current pause in grant administration. So the grant total for those 2 awards is $690,000, and we're waiting to hear from them before we move forward. Cal OES, California Office of Emergency Services, while not a federal agency, they get most of their funding through the feds. And so we're waiting to receive notification to submit a final application on a cybersecurity grant. We're hopeful that California already has these funds and it will move forward, but that grant is for $187,000. We also employ 2 wonderful AmeriCorps fellows. So as we speak, we're having a meeting. Jim Kelly is having a meeting with Civic Spark, who is the program that we hire those fellows through, to find out what's going on with those contracts. We've reassured our fellows that we are interested in having them complete their term with us, and we will work with them to see what depending on what happens. Finally, we have our Pioneer Trail Waterline project. It was originally planned for construction this summer, and it has 3 different pots of funding. One is our congressionally directed spending, our earmark. We've received $1 million with the support of Congressman Kiley for this project. This funding flows through the EPA, and we still don't have a contract in place, despite that funding being appropriated in fiscal year 24. So waiting on that. We also have a $1.2 million grant that comes through the Forest Service. This is a part of our Tahoe Water for Fire partnership that we get funding through the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act. So we have a signed contract. That piece of the funding puzzle is good to go. And then the last funding source for this project is a loan through the Drinking Water SRF that would cover the remaining $3 million. And this has not yet been awarded. So a while back, we had a meeting with EPA, who has the earmark $1 million grant for us, and the SRF, who we're working on that $3 million loan with, and determined that EPA would take the lead on completing the NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. Our contact at SRF has alerted us that EPA has been unresponsive the last few weeks and is worried about the project timeline. So that is one challenge with this project. Another is this project takes place on U.S. Forest Service land, and because of that, we need a special use permit from the Forest Service to complete the project. This also means that there needs to be a NEPA review by the Forest Service, and the Forest Service has notified us that there is a 1-year backlog on doing NEPA review. So due to these constraints, we have a bid that is currently on the market, and we're intending to cancel that bid and plan to rebid in the fall for a 2026 construction pending funding and permitting. So all that is to say that our grants department has been very successful at securing federal funding in the past, and will continue to coordinate with our federal funding agencies to move these grant projects forward. We remain really optimistic that our awards will not be impacted by the change in the administration's priorities. Questions?
That was like the most frustrating thing I've ever heard, Shelley. Yeah, it was just incompetence. Like I'll just leave it alone.
Have we been in contact with Kylie's office, and is there any communication coming through him and helping us better understand?
Yeah.
I guess for me, like, it's planning for the chaos, right? And so
yeah.
I think in a lot of ways we're setting aside, I don't know, $6 million here to battle box-ish?
Yeah, it's like 4.5.
Okay. Okay, I guess I added some numbers.
Yeah. So, yes. So we haven't reached out to Congressman Kiley's office yet. A lot of these are projects that he's been a really big help and supporter on. When the OMB memo came out, everything at the from our perspective, everything working with our federal partners froze, and so we're giving them until the end of this month to see how things shake out, and then we'll bring in Kylie's office if and where needed to help push these through. Because these aren't These aren't like we applied for a grant and we don't know if we got them. These are we applied for a grant, we were told we were getting the money, and we're just in the last stages to have the money flow.
There is kind of a mobilization going on regionally, so if you don't mind getting that list over to Devin.
I have. We had a California Tahoe Alliance meeting on this issue yesterday.
Not alone as an organization. I
Right.
think there's a lot of agencies impacted right now, and it's just the uncertainty, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it isn't a formal freeze anymore because that OMB memo got rescinded. However, nobody wants to move, right? You have federal career staffers that are doing nothing right now. They do not want to stick their necks out for any reason. So it will persist for a while, and we just have to make the best of it and hope that the spigot gets turned back on, because our work is obviously pretty agnostic in terms of, you know, political priorities. However, we're just kind of caught up in the administrative morass that's going on.
Yeah. The only one that I identified that may have conflict is our water conservation grant. So we'll just wait to see. So that's the current plan, is to see how things go this month and then bring in Congressman Kiley, who's been really supportive of our projects, to put pressure on moving these funding sources forward if needed.
So are there any other staff impacts potentially? And again, just like we're going through this current chaos, and then I guess I'm just anticipating that it's not going to get better. Like the funding sources are probably going to dry up as we go through the next 4 years, I would think, but who knows? We'll see. Is there any other staff beyond the AmeriCorps folks that might be impacted by some of these uncertainties?
These projects and staff are what we have identified currently as potentially having impacts from our federal funding.
Can I ask one quick question? So, and just to make sure I have this correct, the EPA is doing a NEPA evaluation, and then the Forest Service is also doing a NEPA evaluation?
Yeah, I just talked to Trevor about this, and EPA and SRF got on the same page for the NEPA review because they need it as a funder. The Forest Service needs it as a landowner, and so we're going to get all the players in the room to talk about how we move this forward. Collaborate and move it forward.
The first time this has come up, it was the same issue on the Tahoe project, which also had SRF funding, but didn't have the federal land. And so Trevor has some experience in navigating this, and so he'll be leading the charge for Premier Trail as well.
But EPA is the lead agency.
EPA is one of the funders, and they.
Trevor's on his hand up. So EPA is typically the lead agency for NEPA for our federal loans, because typically they don't have to work on federal lands. When another federal landowner is involved, like BLM or Forest Service, in this case Forest Service, that agency is the property owner that comes to the issue for NEPA. Basically, one federal agency that sign off for another agency. So it became a challenge to coordinate the Forest Service sign off in conjunction with SRF. That was too much of a color. But they do their own like cultural outreach. They do their own field studies. They do a lot of their own work. So it was redundant, but they wouldn't necessarily accept those concerns. So we did experience a year delay. We're in a very similar situation with color, and we need to proactively cancel the bidding of this project to avoid incurring costs for the
And so it'll be a year once everyone's in alignment. It's going to be a year once everybody's in alignment.
We're a little bit farther along than we were, but it took a fair bit to get onto the Forest Service NEPA schedule. We did engage the forest supervisor at that time, and actually we'll probably go down a similar road once we identify our time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Okay. State of the groundwater basin, water year 2021.
Good afternoon.
Good news, I hope.
Mark Felix, Water Resources Manager. This is good news. So we got that going for us, which is nice. The bad news is that I did bring my water up, and so you know you're in for an earful. But yeah, I like giving this presentation. It's our annual summary of the monitoring and the modeling that we do of our groundwater basin. And a lot of this is done in compliance with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, but we've been doing a lot of this work since 2000 when we adopted our first groundwater management plan. And so just wait, can you guys see it? Oh, sorry.
I can see it.
Exactly.
I can see it on Shane's face.
See a couple pixels of it. You guys can see it now. Okay. So I'll just give a very brief refresher on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. I'll talk about water year 2024's groundwater supply and demand. As a reminder, the water year starts in October and ends at the end of September. So this is going to be covering October 2023 to September 2024. I'm going to talk about our basin management objectives as a groundwater sustainability agency, some of the accomplishments for this last year, and I wanted to spend some time to go over the history of how we became the groundwater sustainability agency and the potential future of the groundwater sustainability agency and our role. And so just a really brief refresher, so the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, as I'll be referring to it from now on probably, was passed in 2014, and this was during the really historic drought that was occurring at the time. At the time, surprisingly, California was one of the few states that wasn't regulating groundwater extraction. We were going through this really severe drought. We were seeing super low pool in a lot of state and federal reservoirs, and a lot of wells in the Central Valley were going dry. And so it was prudent time to do something about it. And so that was passed in 2014, and basically the goal of SGMA was to achieve sustainability through local control. And this local control aspect was really key. And basically what SGMA did was it required medium and high priority basins to form what are called groundwater sustainability agencies. And any group could do this. It didn't necessarily have to be the primary groundwater extractor as we are. But the long and short of it is that in every groundwater basin, you needed full coverage for the jurisdiction of that basin. And so we became the groundwater sustainability agency for the portion of the basin within our control, and El Dorado County became the groundwater sustainability agency for the little remaining sliver that we didn't have any jurisdiction over. And so once we were groundwater sustainability agency, we were required to write a groundwater sustainability plan. That plan contained basin management objectives that would avoid what were referred to as undesirable results. So these undesirable results are the 6 deadly sins of SGMA. That's a lot of S's. But you can see they're lowering groundwater levels, reduction of storage, seawater intrusion, not really a big deal here, degraded groundwater quality, land subsidence, and surface water depletion. And the groundwater sustainability plan basically contained an implementation actions to achieve those basin management objectives. And so we actually had an existing plan. Like I said earlier, we had one in 2000. Kennedy Jenks wrote and updated that plan in 2014. And we were able to resubmit that plan, a modified version of that plan, to the Department of Water Resources. And that and iterations of it have been serving as our groundwater sustainability plan ever since. So just as a reminder, the Tahoe Valley groundwater basin actually surrounds Lake Tahoe. It's glacial sediment, so it was sediment that was deposited while the last glaciers were retreating. And it consists of 3 subbasins. You have Tahoe Valley North, up by Kings Beach there, Tahoe Valley West, and then Tahoe Valley South. Tahoe Valley South is the largest subbasin, and that's the basin that we extract our groundwater from. We break it up into these kind of operational sub-areas. as I've described in different other presentations about groundwater, it's very complicated geology, underlying geology, a lot of interbedded clay layers, not necessarily continuous throughout the basin. And so we do have like a lot of different sub-aquifers within this, but for the purposes, we're calling this the sub-basin. And that's what we monitor and that's what we report on. And so this is just a plot of precipitation. So we measure annual precipitation using the Hagen's Meadow SNOTEL, and we use statistics on that station to determine what kind of water year we had. As you can see, water year 2024 was actually teetering on a dry or a below normal to normal year, which is kind of surprising to me because it felt like decently wet. Did a lot more skiing than I am this year. But yeah, so we had a kind of low normal water year. And so these next couple of plots I'm going to show are actually model results from our Tahoe Valley South groundwater model. This is a mod flow model that was developed by USGS. And basically how the model works is it separates our basin into a 3D matrix of cells. So you can imagine it being kind of like a 3D checkerboard or something. And it basically solves equations that are based on a conservation of mass to calculate, okay, we had this much output from our wells, we had this much input from recharge and precipitation, and these are where it's most likely that our groundwater levels are at. And so this first plot is showing groundwater recharge. So we have two main kinds of groundwater recharge in our subbasin. The first is what's called aerial recharge. That's just rain or snow melt that's occurring directly on top of the sediments themselves and percolating through into the ground. You can see by that blue line kind of halfway through that that stays kind of relatively the same regardless of what kind of water year we're having. And then you can contrast that with what's called mountain block recharge. Or sorry, mountain block recharge is the one that stays relatively the same. And then you can contrast that with the aerial recharge, which is actually a direct snow melt onto the land. And that's varying all over the place because, as you know, how much snow we have stacked up is going to be varying throughout the year. But you can see that, like, on a larger scale, when you look at our total groundwater recharge, it does have variations, but it's pretty much constant over time. There's no trend up or down. This year, in water year 2024, we had 21,000 acre-feet of groundwater recharge, and you can compare that to our average community water system production of 7,500 acre-feet. So that means we basically banked about 3 years, even in a low average year, 3 years worth of supply. So our lab also does twice annual groundwater level monitoring of our network of about 40 groundwater monitoring wells we have throughout the basin. A lot of these are production wells. Some of them are dedicated groundwater monitoring wells. We choose October and May because those represent the seasonal lows in groundwater levels and highs, and we want to see that seasonal difference. But this plot over here, it basically shows the difference between the current groundwater level and the median on the x-axis. So if it's 0, then it means that the current groundwater level was the median, right? And on the y-axis, it's what the percentage of wells that exceed that are. And you can see that about 90% of our groundwater level, or our monitoring wells, are at or above their historical median groundwater elevation. And so, yeah, even in this kind of low normal year, our groundwater basin is remaining very stable. Obviously, we had a big year before. And yeah, over the last 5 years, we saw an average decrease in groundwater levels of only about 1.5 inches. So it's basically a negligible change in groundwater level. We also did a trend analysis, and 98% of our wells are either remaining constant or increasing in elevation over time. So we're not seeing like a long-term decline in groundwater levels. This is just a plot of a couple key groundwater wells, and I just wanted to show you that, you know, we can see this obvious seasonal variability, but the wells are either remaining flat for the most part or increasing. regardless of the water year type. This is a plot of groundwater extraction from the major water purveyors. So STPUD is in this kind of teal color. You can see that over time we have seen lower and lower production, probably largely due to our water conservation efforts, and that this most recent year was one of the lowest production years on record. But yeah, that 13,200 acre-foot figure right there is the sustainable yield for our basin. So that is, in theory, how much water we can extract per year without having undesirable results. And you can see that we are about at half of that. So we have a lot of flexibility in our water supply. So this map on the left shows, so the size of the dot is proportional to the amount of acre feet that we pumped in the water year 2025. You can see that most of the pumping is kind of focused in the urban area, particularly like near the Tahoe neighborhood. We have our 3 largest producers there. We have smaller production in Myers. And we also used our metering data to compare the consumption that we saw with the production from the wells. And from this, we're estimating about a 13% loss, water loss, and that is about consistent with previous studies that we've done of water loss. So this next slide is groundwater supply for 2024. And so the groundwater supply is basically, it's calculated as the amount of groundwater that we have in storage in the basin minus our storage threshold, below which we see negative results. And you can see over time, this orange right here, our groundwater supply, though it's fluctuated a little bit, it's generally been increasing. And so we currently have about 46,000 or 47,000 acre feet of available storage, and like I said earlier, we only have about 7,500 acre feet of production a year. So we have quite a big cushion for times of drought right now. And so I mentioned earlier that our groundwater sustainability plan establishes these basin management objectives. These are the basin management objectives that have been identified in our first update to our alternative plan. And you can see that we've either met thresholds or have achieved pretty much all of these objectives. There are some that are shown as in progress, which are kind of ongoing efforts. And we also have a couple that are related to the relationship between surface water and groundwater that we're actively working on developing monitoring methods for, because we don't actually have a current way to address them. I think last time I was here I talked about the groundwater dependent ecosystem monitoring, which you would need shallow wells to monitor the effects of pumping on those, which we don't have. So we're working right now on a groundwater dependent ecosystem monitoring plan with the Desert Research Institute. We're also working on updating our model to make it a little bit more accurate in terms of precipitation and climate expectations for the future, so we can look further out in the future and determine what our water supply is likely to be. We had one stakeholder advisory group meeting, and we've met all of the reporting requirements. And so I just submitted the water year annual report to the Department of Water Resources. It's a pretty standard report if you've skimmed through it before, but that will be available soon on the district's website, and hopefully DWR will look at it in the last year, or in the next year. It takes them a while to review them usually. And so I wanted to devote a period at the end of this presentation to talk about, so many of you have seen this presentation before, right? And we kind of probably sound the same every year, right? Yeah, the precipitation changes, yeah, we have different water years, but our groundwater basin is really stable. And so you might be thinking, well, how did we end up subject to these requirements of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act if ostensibly the basin is so stable? And so that's what I was going to go over today, and hopefully we can have a discussion of potential next steps for our involvement with SGMA. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but SGMA came up at a time when the state was really struggling with water supply shortage, right? These empty reservoir photos here were not unique. Yeah, so at the time I was working for Valley Water down in Santa Clara County, and our 12 reservoirs all pretty much looked exactly like this. There were a lot of reported instances of groundwater wells in the Central Valley that were going dry. People were being supplied bottled water in many cases in a lot of communities because their municipal wells were dry. And so this was a huge issue and an emergency for the state. But we didn't really suffer from that because we have a very atypical aquifer by California standards. And so you think about the Central Valley, it gets mountain block recharge the same way that we get it, but from the western slope of Sierra. And then they also have more managed aquifer recharge there that relies on diverting streams, right? And so when you have a low snow year in the Sierra, you don't have a lot of water to divert for managed recharge. You don't have a lot of mountain block coming down. The Central Valley is huge. The Sierras are pretty big, but not all that big in comparison. And compare that to us, where we have this really, really large watershed that even a little bit of snow is going to top us off because our basin is so small. You can kind of see in this photo, and I didn't delineate the basin area, but the basin area is very small relative to the watershed. And so that's why we see such stable groundwater levels. And so we really weren't suffering from the same water supply shortages and overpumping that the rest of the state was suffering from. And you can kind of see evidence of this in the model results that I just gave you, and in the groundwater levels that we measured over time. And so I've kind of highlighted in red here from 2011 to 2017, that was when we had this really historic drought. You can see we did see a slight decline in groundwater supply here over time on the left, but we only lost about 20% of our groundwater storage over a number of years, 6 years, and we had so much excess that it really didn't affect us operationally. It didn't affect our ability to meet demands. You could see that once we got a single wet year, 2017, that immediately rebounded, and it was even higher than before the drought. Right? And so we do see slight declines over time during extended dry periods, but we rebound really quick here. And so how Sigma worked was before DWR determined whether a basin needed to have a groundwater sustainability agency formed, is first they did this prioritization to separate basins into high, medium, low, and very low priority. And so for these high and medium priority basins, they were required to form a GSA, they were required to write a GSP and implement it. Low priority basins weren't required, but it was recommended. Very low priority basins, it wasn't recommended. And initially, we were ranked very low priority because, as you can see in this slide, we were exempt because we had less than 9,500 acre-feet of groundwater extracted per year, and we had what DWR determined to be no documented impacts. And so initially we weren't going to be part of this Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, even though we were managing groundwater since 2000 under our own groundwater management plan. And when this draft prioritization came out, so SCPUD at the time submitted a comment to DWR that claimed that the ranking here does not accurately reflect the significance of groundwater quality impacts within the TVS basin. And what that was referring to was the historic PCE plume that's been in the South Y area since the 1970s. And this is public knowledge, that this exists. And I believe that the reason why the Department of Water Resources didn't consider this as a documented impact when they were originally ranking us was because that action is not addressable by sustainable groundwater management. This is a point source of pollution that was released over a period of time from a certain property, and it doesn't matter basically what the groundwater extractors do in the basin. That's going to persist there until it gets cleaned up. And so I believe that that was the thinking at the time. At the time, I think that also, you know, it was this new regulation that was out. There was purportedly going to be funding for that. And we thought at the time that if we had this designation, that it would make us competitive for grant programs and competitive for funding opportunities that the Department of Water Resources was releasing related to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And so I think it was well-intentioned at the time, but it hasn't really panned out that way, as I'll describe in future slides. And so I kind of mentioned this earlier about the, is SGMA the right tool for the job for addressing pollution? And I believe that the answer is no, because groundwater sustainability agencies don't have authority over regulating pollution, point source or non-point source discharge. Basically, all a groundwater sustainability agency can do is impose fees, extraction fees on extractors. We're the main extractor, so I guess we could charge ourselves. But in theory, we could charge Lukens, we could charge LPA, we could charge Keys, we could find out who the private well owners are and charge them with groundwater extraction and use that funding to do sustainable groundwater management actions. But the thing is that there aren't really sustainable groundwater management actions to do in this basin because our basin is so stable. And this idea of taking funding from groundwater extractors and using it for a cleanup, for example, not only is that not within the purview of a groundwater sustainability agency, but it's also sort of the public subsidizing the discharger and cleaning up their mess, trying to kind of get them off the hook for something they should be responsible for. And so that's why the authority for that kind of water quality enforcement and cleanup really lies on the State Water Resources Control Board. And that's also probably why they've been in litigation for this, over this for 15 years. But yeah, so if the reason that we're in SGMA is because we have this bad actor, basically, I would argue that SGMA isn't helping us get any closer to a clean aquifer. So next, has it opened any doors for us? That was something that we were really hopeful for, especially because we saw there were 2 rounds of DWR grants. We did work with Kennedy Jenks a couple years ago. We put in a grant application for $2.6 million, which would have funded a lot of our compliance with SGMA and also kind of some ancillary groundwater management actions. But we were denied funding for that. We didn't get that funding, and it's not really surprising because in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of groundwater sustainability in California, we're just not all that high priority. We're very stable. We don't have a supply problem. And like I said, the only issue that we have is really this PCE plume that isn't really addressable through the teeth that SGMA gives. Another issue is that I feel like being in a medium priority basin could actually put us at a disadvantage for other grant programs because our involvement in SGMA is seen as regulatory compliance. So if, for example, we wanted to put in a grant application to the USGS or some other agency for like a data management system or for a consultant to help us update our groundwater management plan every 5 years, then they might say, well, why would we give you money for that? You have to do it anyway. And so I think it could be, it's kind of this double-edged sword thing where we're not competitive enough for the DWR grants because we have a very stable aquifer, and then being party to this regulation is also, I feel like, making us less competitive for outside grants. And SGMA has had a big cost to us. Over time, since 2014, we've spent almost $3 million on implementation of the groundwater sustainability plan. That has been mostly consulting. That has been for updating this plan. It's a big, like, 500-page plus document. And it also consumes a lot of staff time So on average, since the beginning of this, about 5 work weeks per year for one employee have been devoted just for the SGMA compliance. But the thing is, it's highly episodic work. And so what will happen is, like, in the years where we have a plan update, that'll consume, you know, most of my winter. And I feel like that has an opportunity cost. And the cost is that we can fall behind on our capital improvement program and things that are kind of getting us closer to our core mission. And so I think that a good example of that is that, so I've been here, you know, not even 2 years, and I've already pulled 6 pumps and wells. There's a lot of deferred maintenance that needs to be done on our system, and I'm not surprised, and the reason is because our previous water resources manager, rightfully so, was very focused on getting us in compliance with this act and getting together a compliant groundwater sustainability plan. But yeah, so that has a cost. We also saw, you know, delays to deployment well rehab, probably because of this as well. And yeah, it's time that could be spent planning and implementing our capital improvement program and our well asset management program. And so,
Sorry, how long was the $3 million? How many years?
Since 2014.
2014.
Yeah, so since SGMA was passed.
Okay.
Yeah. But like I said, it's very episodic, so it's like, you know, over 2 years you'll have a plan update with GRI, and that'll be like $1 million or, yeah. And so I was looking into this a little bit further this year because when I saw these exemption criteria, like, so that we could automatically be exempted and classified as a low priority basin, I was like, wait, that applies to us. Why are we part of this? And so I was looking further into the regulation and the ranking and looking at DWR's definition of documented impacts, and had kind of arrived in the conclusion that, like, the initial ranking was correct and that we shouldn't have been ranked medium priority. And so we actually worked with PC Law Group, who specializes in this kind of environmental law. They were a Jones Mayor Special Counsel that we were able to be connected with, and we prepared a letter from Paul to Paul Gosselin, the Deputy Director of Department of Water Resources, Sustainable Groundwater Management, and we requested a downgrade back to very low priority, consistent with the original assessment. We kind of emphasized the fact that DWR's definition of documented impacts are impacts that are addressable by sustainable groundwater management. This is not, and it's also currently being addressed by State Water Resources Control Board. But unfortunately, DWR declined to downgrade us, and they referenced our own 2019 comment letter where we asked to be part of SGMA, which is a bit embarrassing, but not all that unexpected. And I think that the main reason for this was that not because DWR thinks that we should be part of this, but because it would set a bad precedent for other truly high priority basins who might want to follow suit. And so I understand why they denied us, but unfortunately they don't have any plans in the future to reevaluate their rankings. And the only way that they would reevaluate their ranking is if the basin was delineated differently. So if we're like, okay, actually our basin goes to here, not there, then that would spur this re-ranking. So yeah, that's probably not going to happen. Our basin is pretty well established. And it also kind of opens another question, I think, for other actual high priority basins. What if we start meeting our sustainability objectives? Then are we still part of this forever just because we were bad at one point? And so I don't think DWR quite knows how they're going to handle this. It took them 2 years to get a response to our last update to our groundwater sustainability plan. So we had been operating under that plan for 2 years before we even knew if it was approved. But we had to. And as far as these annual reports that I prepare every year, we never hear back from them. I'm not sure where they go. I send them from my email, and they go into the cloud somewhere, and they're gone forever as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, I think that they have a lot on their hands. I'm not sure that we're a huge priority for them. And so this kind of brings up the idea, we do have the option to rescind our role as the Groundwater Sustainability Agency for the sub-basin. That is something that I would recommend, that I think would warrant further discussions, both with us and with El Dorado County Water Agency. But the key thing to know is that we're not required to be the Groundwater Sustainability Agency for the basin. It doesn't have to be us. Like I said earlier, once a basin is prioritized, basically any qualified agency can step up and form to be the GSA. For the most part, it's actually the county if nobody steps up. It's very unusual to have a water agency, water district be the GSA for a sub-basin. But I think that the thinking at the time was that, oh, we're the major groundwater extractor, we have the most to lose, so we should be in control, which was, I think, not bad logic. But if we did decide to do this, there would be several steps to it. So first of all, we would need to work with El Dorado County, get on the same page. Our board would need to have a resolution to rescind our role as the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And then at that point, not DWR, but the State Water Resources Control Board would step in. DWR doesn't have any teeth. The State Water Board does. And so what they would do is that if we are an orphan basin for over 180 days, which we would be, then they would have a public hearing to designate the basin as probationary. And there's another waiting period. If nobody steps up, which I don't think anybody would, then the State Water Resources Control Board could develop an interim groundwater sustainability plan to enforce for the basin. But the interesting thing about that is that the only lever that the State Water Board has to pull, really, is putting limits on pumping. And like I said earlier, we don't have a sustainability problem. So there's no lever, really, for them to pull for our extraction. Ironically, their plan would be forced to address whatever unmet sustainability goals that there are, which in our case is only the South Y PCE plan, which is already State Water Resources Control Board's job to enforce. And so it would basically be them pointing their finger back at themselves. Hey, you guys need to clean this up. And so I don't think it would come to this. I think that we would probably fade into the ether and there would be no longer a groundwater sustainability agency in this basin just because we are not high priority. We're a very low priority basin. The only thing is that the State Water Board could require technical or monitoring reports. However, the cost of those reports would be shared by the extractors and not placed entirely on STPUD as they currently are. We do have a cost share with El Dorado County. But I feel like it's an unfair burden that our ratepayers are the ones responsible for implementing this regulatory program when they're not the ones who caused the PCE plan, right? In a way, they're already subsidizing the dischargers. If we're truly only part of this program because of the groundwater pollution, then I feel like the discharger should be paying. But we know how hard it is to make the dischargers pay. And so there are obviously a lot of benefits of stepping down. There's a reduced administrative burden. It would avoid unnecessary projects. Like we don't need this groundwater dependent ecosystem monitoring program, I don't think. But if we're part of SGMA, we do need it to be in compliance with SGMA. Our basin doesn't need it, the regulation needs it. It would save our ratepayers money, the cost of implementing this program. It would free up staff time, my time, to be devoted to STPUD's core mission, which is to provide safe, clean drinking water to the community and provide wastewater removal. And it would also allow us to, as we have done since 2000, align our groundwater monitoring and management with the true needs of the basin. Instead of basing what we're doing around this regulation, it would allow us to monitor and report out how we see fit. And I think that that's something that we would continue doing We are the major groundwater extractor. We are the one with the most to lose from it, and we should still be doing our due diligence and doing all of our monitoring, reporting, data analysis, all that. I just think that we're operating in this cage that we were not designed to fit in with Sigma, because we don't have declining groundwater levels, we're not over-extracting. There are a couple of risks to stepping down. A major one is the optics to the public and funding agencies, right? So we all know that our groundwater basin is very sustainable, but if, the public sees, oh, we had a medium priority basin that was part of this law, and then they decide to walk away from it, it might not look good. And another thing is some of the funding agencies are affiliated with this program, right? So State Water Resources Control Board is the regulatory teeth of Sigma, and they also administer SRF. So don't want to be a bad actor and jeopardize funding. I'm not sure if that would happen, but just thinking about all the possible risks. Another thing is if the state or if others step in, which is a possibility, then we could lose control. It is unlikely but not impossible that we could be charged a groundwater extraction fee for implementation of a program that another agency is running and managing. Another thing, so I've done a lot of regulatory compliance work for total maximum daily load programs, and I can tell you that a lot of the time the only ones who benefit from those programs are the laboratories that do the sample analysis. A lot of the time no real improvement is being made in the environment, but we're doing a ton of monitoring. Spending hundreds of, we're not doing this, but other agencies spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for monitoring that is being sent to an email address and probably never being looked at. We actually, for our Indian Creek Reservoir TMDL, we spend about $30 to $50K a year in monitoring. It's just part of our monitoring requirements of the TMDL. So that is a possibility too. We could have these somewhat punitive monitoring and reporting requirements. And then, another thing is you could have a successor agency come in who is really using the full teeth of Sigma, charging us an extraction fee, imposing pumping and monitoring limits on us, things like that. So there's definitely, there are risks of stepping down, but I think that there's also, we're also staying in is harming us in some ways. And so I just wanted to kind of open the discussion on that and see what the board's feelings were on potentially pursuing this idea of rescinding our roles around our sustainability agency. Is that something that you guys would be on board for? Is it a non-starter? This would obviously be a really long process of doing this. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but as currently stands, we're in this forever, pretty much, until further notice. So,
Can you click back to slide either 11 or 12, getting at some of the targeting?
This one?
Yeah. So, are there actually numbers that we can achieve here? If you're somebody that's going to lose?
Yeah.
Technical studies, is there
There are numbers, yeah. So some of them have numerical goals, and some of them have qualitative goals. So for example, the strengthening collaborative relationships, it's not you must initiate collaborative relationships with 5 different outside agencies, but for the maintain a long-term groundwater supply, we're looking at statistical trends over time, declining groundwater levels. We're looking at our sustainable yield, which is basically the level at which we'd start drawing down into our stream intakes. And so it's interesting because our sustainable yield for the basin is actually based on the infrastructure that's already in the ground. So all you'd have to do is drill your wells deeper, and then you can have a new sustainable yield, right?
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is we achieve these objectives. Does that give us a better leg up on stepping down, or what does it mean to achieve these things?
I think that if we're continuously showing, as we have been for the last 10 years, that we're meeting our basin management objectives without fail, that makes it less likely for others to step in the event that we did step down. But because we are achieving the objective, it doesn't mean we're yeah, there's no benefit for achieving them.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, like you establish this stuff and this keeps on going, marching through time. Some of these things are qualitative, so they're really not really achievable, right? We can't really do that. I don't know, I guess that's, you know, when this really kind of caught my eye, this particular slide, just because I was thinking if we can demonstrate, hey, we're meeting all these things, and the scope of a monitoring program could, I guess, kind of check in and just kind of confirm these things over time, and I don't know. So okay.
Yeah. And our monitoring, our normal monitoring that we do, totally. Like, we don't currently do additional monitoring to assess any of these things. We would have to. In our next 5-year update, we do have to have groundwater dependent ecosystem monitoring, which would require construction of new monitoring wells. El Dorado County won't fund implementation; they'll only fund planning. And so, with our cost share. And so that's the issue. Is now we're like, okay, well, if we actually want to be in compliance, we're having to drill these monitoring wells. Could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. 100% district ratepayer money. We're not getting grants for this. We're not getting like anything for this. No. The only way it would be like pencil out is like start charging extraction fees, right? But like we're the main extractor. We don't want to charge Lukens or Keys extraction fees. We don't want to find out individual well owners and charge them extraction fees. Yeah, I mean, we want them to connect to our system. But
even without Sigma, it's not like we're a bad steward to the groundwater system.
Totally.
We're doing our stuff. And so, to me, I mean, my thoughts are there's no benefit to this program. It's set up as a regulatory program. We meet all of the criteria like flying colors. It's not like a big deal like we're going to get hammered regulatory-wise. So, to me, it's like do the bare minimum to just meet the basic requirements, manage those costs. You know, I'd like to figure out what that annual is because, and I also want to know the relationship with like El Dorado Water Agency, right? Who is, they're the GSA or the groundwater agency for the West Slope, right?
They are for like the portion of the subbasin, which is out of our jurisdiction, which is only very small.
No, the West.
Oh, for the West Slope. Oh, yeah, correct. Yeah. They are for the subbasin.
They have an agency that already has to kind of do stuff. I mean, my thought is having some initial conversations with El Dorado Water Agency and to kind of tell them our story here because we're also shipping off tax dollars to El Dorado Water Agency, and I don't see getting a lot of that back. So it's almost like if we can work out a deal where they can take over this responsibility in recognition of receiving those tax dollars, you know, maybe that's an avenue. But I appreciate your analysis at the end of like, it's truly like rolling the dice. Like if we were to try and rescind, you kind of don't know what you're going to get. And I'm not very comfortable with that because especially how regulatory environments work. I mean, look at this process, right? Like half-baked regulatory. It's like all the regulatory upfront stuff, but then there's no tail end of here's what you do when you meet everything, you know? Like the fact that they're not reassessing tells me it's a completely failed regulatory framework. So those are my 2 cents. And, you know, I've already started to probe around in terms of just with my board seat on the El Dorado Water Agency to try to better understand, you know, what the roles are here for not only groundwater but other things, and how can we be more efficient, right? Because to me, this is definitely not an efficient deal for us.
Can they tell you what their status is on the West Slope? Like, do you know what their status is on?
Yeah, I mean they're doing all this stuff too, right? I couldn't even tell you.
That's the thing. Like, they have like my thing is like if we go into a relationship where they take over our area, do we get penalized because maybe the West Slope isn't meeting it, but now we've got to?
No, they're totally separate. Totally separate.
But if they have like a similar model, like they have extraction fees or something, they're like, we're just going to plop how we do it up here. Maybe that doesn't work for us, right? So I think some initial conversations to see would would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, because,
Yeah, we're definitely not asking for approval to begin the
no,
process.
no.
We just wanted to gauge your understanding of our interest in wanting to at least continue the discussion internally as well as with the ops committee, and then periodically update the board with the findings.
Yeah, and I think that like we became the technical lead on the groundwater sustainability agency because we have the infrastructure, the monitoring infrastructure, we have the expertise, we know the groundwater basin. But I think that even that said, they're probably better equipped to be the GSA because they're a straight planning agency. And like honestly, like I enjoy this stuff. Like I like the data analysis. I like working with data. I like data analysis. I have a lot of experience with this kind of like monitoring and reporting and things like that. And it was one of the things that initially attracted me to this position, actually. But like I just feel like triaging this with the rest of the well asset management stuff that we have going on, it's like the priority just isn't there. And like for El Dorado County, like they are a strictly planning agency. So I would expect that we would continue like working really closely together if they did take that over, but it would just be that this burden isn't falling on us, and it falls on us at the most inopportune moment, right? Because it's when we're trying to gear up for the construction season. We have a short construction season. Winter for us is the time to plan, get all of our contracts and specs together, put things out to bid, and it's like, oh man, I have all these major, really important, critical water infrastructure projects, and then I have to like squeeze this thing in just to like check a box, you know? Like, kind of doesn't feel right. And it doesn't feel right that like our ratepayers are the ones who are paying basically for the entirety of this, even though we're not the only extractors, you know. And
this, I'm, you know, what really caught my eye is like, you know, the savings we could have for our ratepayers. I really like that point. I guess for me, like dropping off monitoring entirely is not palatable to me. Like, so I guess for me, it'd be really good to understand what's that scope of monitoring that we want to maintain, just so we don't, you know, we continue to understand that, yeah, we're, you know, even though we're just showing flatlining, hey, we're still doing stuff, and we're still maintaining our groundwater supply, then I guess that would be helpful to me, you know.
And maybe that could be part of the deal, right? Yeah. Like we maintain some sort of monitoring responsibility as part of our part, but EDWA can package it up and do all the reporting and it's a huge cost to us.
I would never suggest that we stop monitoring. Right. Our monitoring is super important.
Something to bring definitely to that discussion. I mean, there's a value there.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to give you context for why I keep giving you this presentation, and it's the same every time.
You know, we're fortunate. We're start comparing to like Valley Water and some of these other, you know, places that their lands are like.
Yeah, it's different.
So yeah, we're pretty fortunate, but yeah, it's just kind of, I think the whole.
I appreciate you bringing forward the process improvement. I mean, you know, taking a critical look at this stuff, being more efficient, especially when there's dollars involved, is important. So definitely appreciate that.
Shelley gonna lead the messaging on this as we move forward. But obviously, this is something that's going to play out over the next. What's the timing on this?
We've submitted our annual report for this year. Our next update is due in 2028, I think, 7. Which sounds like far away, but to put together a 500+ page document, get a consultant on, it's like we have to start thinking about it now. So.
How much money do we send to El Dorado County annually?
We don't know exactly because once again, it's not there's not a dollar amount that they actually peel off the top of our property tax. It's actually a portion that shows up on everybody's tax bill in the basin. So it fluctuates every year. And this was probably 10 years ago, we thought it was about $450,000. So you think what the value has done since then, so it's probably significantly more.
I mean, I'm ultimately in agreement with Nick. We need to whittle this down to the greatest extent possible, look to shove it off. But, I mean, for basically the whole agenda is why I don't trust the state of California. Like, I mean, we can't, it's just too great a risk to, like, cede it to them, even though I think the liability is somewhat limited. So, yeah, I'd love to see, I'm in favor of it, and I do want to compliment you for bringing this forward and taking the initiative to kind of explain optionality on things we could do to save costs, especially in an era of, like, potentially dwindling grant resources and so forth. I think we're going to have to take a critical eye to a lot of things in this regard. And so I'm fully supportive of seeing where we can go with it. I do really appreciate you bringing it forward.
I agree.
Yeah.
Looking back to your last slide and just looking at that list of risks, I guess it's not your very last slide, but this right here, I think to whatever extent we can manage that risk, I think that would, make sure that we can reduce that risk as best as possible. So that might be a focal point moving forward. Yeah.
And like Nick said too, like you can skate along. Like it would be very easy for us to skate along with bare minimum effort on this, but that doesn't look great either. Like, so it's kind of
I think what you said yourself, nobody may be even reading it.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. So like, if I write a book and we'll read it, how
Well,
do we
they already think of it as a low priority thing. So
That's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
Not worried about it.
Yeah. Like we could basically like continue resubmitting our current plan and just continue saying it's adequate, but like it's not because it's missing some certain statutory requirements of the act, right? So it's like, but we could just submit it and say it's adequate for us for now. Right? Yeah. Which I mean, never.
Right.
I think like. Yeah.
They put you in that file administratively.
Yeah.
Like they replied pretty quickly on our downgrade request, though.
But it took them a while.
Okay.
Like 3 weeks or something, but a lot.
Looked at that.
A lot faster than
Yeah.
I'm gonna get back to it. Yeah. That was the general manager at the time, but I think it was Paul. Or was the assistant general manager? Actually, it wasn't Richard. I think it was Paul. Was he AD? It was Paul. Yeah. Yeah. But I think it was like, it was well intentioned. It was basically like, look, we have this like pollutant plume that's not being dealt with. Maybe this is a way to get it dealt with. It's like, be careful what you wish for, right?
Well, it is 4:05, but I thank you for your presentation. Is there any other last parting shots or comments? But I think you got what you needed, right? I think, yes, let's move forward, but be smart about it, I guess.
and just update us as things move forward when appropriate.
All right, well, yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Long time in the boardroom today.
All the other general manager report.
I did have two more things that I can make it very quick in this information slide, but I didn't want to bring them up. One was an item that we talked about a couple of times here, that's the safety officer position. We've been discussing the need for this for quite some time to add the district safety officer and develop and provide all the required and necessary training for our staff. We know that these programs are incredibly important to the safety of our employees, and this is the top priority position that we're considering right now. We're just about done developing the job description as well as appropriate pay scale, and we expect to bring it forward for board consideration no later than the March 24th meeting. That's where we're at with that. And then the next time, speaking about conversations with EBR ranchers, the next topic is new Mojave fees imposed on California properties receiving recycled water. So I received a call last week from one of the smaller property owners out in Alpine County who do receive our water, and they told me they received a $1,500 bill from the water board, and were wondering if we were aware of this new charge and if it had anything directly related to our operations. And then subsequently, I believe the next day, we received an email from one of our contacts at Baha'i who told us that the state established a new fee scale literally just 4 months ago back in September. And it imposes an annual charge on every property who receives recycled water in the state. Since then, Adrian has reached out to all of the ranchers just to let them know that we're aware of this new fee and that we intend to work with them to get a better understanding of really the purpose of the fee and what actual impact it's going to have on the ranches. And at this point, we're just planning to continue to gain more understanding of this fee and the potential impact on the ranchers' desire to continue receiving our water if they have to pay the fee. That's our biggest concern, obviously. We do have an operations committee meeting next week, and we're planning to provide some more info at that time and possibly be ready to make some recommendations to the committee, and then we'll discuss it more in 2 weeks.
So are you aware of any public process for the establishment? Are they currently being charged a fee? I guess I missed some questions.
No, this is new.
So it's a brand new fee that came up.
Yeah, and the ones that did actually receive it, the first person that I talked to actually, when she first got it, she thought it was just a mistake and threw it away. And then she got the second notice, and that's when she called me to find out what was going on, as well as she called Lahontan. And at that time, when she spoke to Lahontan, they didn't have very much information to give her because they really weren't aware of it. And I don't know what the public process was, but she did submit, it looked like some adopted ordinances and fee schedules. But it is new.
Do we know if it's scalable by size of the property or is it flat?
Well, I think Adrian found out that every one of the ranchers, the bill was $1,500. But when I scrolled through the legislation that was adopted, it did look like that. I mean, there were various levels of fees. Yeah. So I don't know how theirs were established all at the same level, since they're all different size properties. But we'll get some more info on that.
I'm meeting with 2 of the ranchers tomorrow, and then I can do the extra update.
Still a pretty good deal.
Well, we're not, I guess for me, how do they swoop in on that when it's,
Well, I mean, and just the nexus between the fee and the mitigation, it seems arbitrary. And it doesn't seem that, honestly, based on recent, the Supreme Court going back a couple of years, you have to show that direct nexus between the fee you're charging and what you're mitigating. And it's just hard for me to believe, everything we've said about the state's incompetence today doesn't seem like that can be something they could put together. And the fact the own agency had no idea what was going on also. I mean, this is preposterous, honestly, but.
Is there something about the mitigation?
I don't think so.
Actually, so I read the Title 22 part of where they're stating that they can charge this fee and it is related to mitigation. So.
Right, but you could say it's mitigation, but you have to say $1,500 is doing what and how that fee is generated. I mean, does it include that level of detail? Yeah, I think so.
And then if you have a call to Lahontan, they have not called me back yet, but that's something to chat with them for Tuesday on.
Yeah.
Maybe you can invite them for a presentation to the board. I mean, it'd be good to know, invite them to our board, and they can kind of give us an update on how it works and what it means, and how the money's getting used to mitigate stuff.
It's not.
Well,
I'll get you the end goal right there.
Okay. Anything else, Paul? No. Okay, I'm moving on to 11 as the past meetings and future meetings, and then we're moving into closed session. So with that, we'll close this board. Move into closed session. Nothing to report. Moving on to item 14A. Liz?
All right, so what I have for you guys this afternoon is the 2 side letters to implement the compensation study that was recently performed. So just a reminder, in the prior union and management contracts that expired last June, it was agreed upon that the district would perform a total compensation study to be implemented June 20th, 2024. So in late 2023, we formed 2 committees for the union and management group. We sent out our RFPs to multiple consultants, and then shortly after we evaluated the proposals that were received, and we selected Cost and Associates to perform the compensation study. Because it's been a year and a half, they did change their name to Gallagher. They were bought out. So they began work on data collection early 2024,
We received some initial data in May of 2024, worked with the two committees on the results and implementation, and finally came to an agreement for implementation in December and June, respectively, for the union and management. So today I'm going to be asking for two side letters to be approved, to be incorporated into that successor MOU that we agreed upon in June of 2024. So,
any public comment? Seeing none? Just looking at these side letters, I didn't never sign one of these things, but there are, so yeah, I've signed it, Paul signs it, Melanie attests, and then we have a whole line of managers that sign it. And then similarly with the, I guess the union side, there's a number of union reps, I guess, for the different departments that are going to be signing that. So I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of what that looks like. So what's your desired action?
So requested board action is to authorize the district to enter into a side letter for the union and the management staff outlining the terms of implementation of the 2024 compensation.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Director Exline?
Yes.
Director Sheehan?
Yes.
President Ronco?
Yes.
Director Haven? Yes. The motion passes unanimous with Director Henderson recusing himself.
Okay. Adjourn.
Kelly, I have to tell you,